Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to learn about some Elden Ring lore. And given that it is October at the moment, I wanted to choose something that would fit well within the spooky season. So I picked a topic related to the Frenzied Flame. The Frenzied Flame. Now, if you've played Elden Ring, you know about the Frenzied Flame. It is a sort of cosmic entity that seeks to burn away all division that exists, melt all differentiation in the universe, until everything that exists is one undivided unity. And it manifests as madness, but one kind of motivated by despair, motivated by nihilism, motivated by extreme, intolerable pain. And as you can see, that topic seems somewhat appropriate for Halloween. But the Frenzied Flame is a very large topic with many very interesting facets to talk about. And for this video, I wanted to hone in on one specific story related to the Frenzied Flame. One instance in the world of Elden Ring where the Frenzied Flame plays a central role. And the story that I'd like to talk about today is the story of the Great Caravan. The Great Caravan. So the Great Caravan is, well, you know what? Before we jump into that, maybe we should start with the beginning of the game, the beginning of Elden Ring. Very, very early on, you emerge from a catacomb, and you come out into the bright world of Elden Ring, emerging into the region of Limgrave, with its rolling green hills and its ruined architecture seemingly fallen from the sky, and of course Castle Stormvale up on the hill, looking down over it all. And if you explore, you will likely come soon to the Church of Kalé. If you can get past the tree sentinel, of course. And in the Church of Kalé, you will find a man sitting on the ground. And this man is named Kalé. And he is a merchant. And I'll read some of his dialogue for you now. You are tarnished. I can see that. And I can also see that you're not after my throat. Then why not purchase a little something? I am Kalé, purveyor of fine goods. I am of a nomadic people, selling wares as I travel. The land has been tainted by madness since the shattering of the Elden Ring. It's only tarnished like yourself who keep things from drying up entirely. Let's say you're a very welcome customer. You know, if you can spare the runes, you should buy yourself a crafting kit. A crafting kit allows you to make basic items on your own, essential, really, if you intend to survive out here for any duration. The kit costs a bundle, and I admit I do take my cut. But the important thing is that you survive. Every customer counts, after all. There are other of my peoples who yet survive in these lands. If the mood takes you when you meet one, then offer them some trade, won't you? My people, wanderers all, have long been spurned by the grace of gold, which is why we cannot settle, but instead are forced into this pitiful, unceasing journey. But, thanks to that, things are not so different for us now, though the Elden Ring is shattered. I think this makes us kindred spirits of sorts, your people, the Tarnished, and mine. So, as Kalé says there, he is of a merchant people, and indeed, as you explore the lands between, you will occasionally come across a merchant dressed very similarly to Kalé, but with a different colored clothing. Their clothing is multicolored. They're very bright people in their clothes, and the fabrics that they drape on their tall, donkey-like beast of burden that hauls some of their goods. The donkeys are very adorable little creatures. I kind of wish that you could, if there were like skins for torrent or something, that you could ride on these guys, because they're very cute. And if you provoke one of the merchants, they can actually hop up onto their buddy, the horse thing, and ride around and attack you from horseback, which is fun. They all seem to be musicians, as they all carry a stringed instrument. It's kind of reminiscent of an erhu, Chinese two-stringed little instrument played with a bow. Their personalities are sort of unique, each one. Some are suspicious of you. Some are friendly and invite you to trade. Some are paranoid or afraid. Some are seem so kind of lonely, or like it's been so long since they've spoken to other people that they, maybe have forgotten how to speak even. But regardless, they are all willing to do a bit of trade with you. You can buy trinkets and ammunition and armor and things like that in exchange for your runes. And they also sell information in the form of notes. These little notes that you can buy that give you clues to your surroundings, little pieces of advice, or interesting tidbits of information that might put you onto the scent of a questline or something like that. The clothing that they wear, you can acquire it. It's the Nomadic Merchants set. And the first sentence of each part of the set is different, as it describes what piece of the set, it is, whether it's the boots or the clothing or whatnot. But beyond that, the descriptions are all identical. So I'll go ahead and read the hat part of the set, and this will give us a good jumping-off point for today's topic about the Great Caravan. So here we go. Nomadic Merchant's Chapeau. Chapeau of the nomadic merchants, decorated with tiny gems in a wide spectrum of colors. These merchants once thrived as the Great Caravan, but after being accused of heretical beliefs, their entire clan was rounded up and buried alive far underground. Then they chanted a curse of despair and summoned the flame of frenzy. So, this is, I'm pretty sure, the only time in the entire game that the Great Caravan is mentioned by name. There is some cut content later on in this video. I'll talk about that. But in terms of what's actually in the game, what's, canonical, I think this is the only direct reference to the Great Caravan, or where the name is said. There are other sources of information about it that we will explore, but this one description kind of gives the whole story, and we learn of the tragic fate of the Great Caravan. So let's kind of review. So we know that there's these merchants that were meeting around the lands between, and we buy things from them. And apparently, once upon a time, their people, their culture, there was a group of them that thrived in this one, train of merchants. They all traveled together in this great caravan, and presumably, moved from land to land, doing great trade wherever they went, and then moving on to the next destination to buy and sell there as well. And then they were accused of heretical beliefs, and they were gathered up and locked in a prison, buried alive far underground. So, quite a tragic tale, but it doesn't end there, because we get the description. In the description after that it says, they chanted a curse of despair and summoned the flame of frenzy. So, after this horrible, incomprehensibly evil thing was done to them, they reached out to the frenzied flame, that cosmic being that can kind of be summoned by horrible pain and suffering. And they summoned that force down to them, down into their prison. And so, presumably, the merchants that we find throughout the lands between, they're survivors of that culture, whether they were outcasts or lone wanderers, travelers who were apart from the Great Caravan when it was captured. We can't say for sure what led to them being saved from the fate that took the Great Caravan. But for whatever reason, these merchants do survive throughout the lands between. And we can actually find the Great Caravan, or the remains of it. You travel to Lanedell, the royal capital, and descend into the sewers through the subterranean shunning grounds. And finally, into the Frenzied Flame proscription. A catacomb, a sort of vertical shaft of tombs and sarcophagi and whatnot. And the place is full. Every inch of ground is covered by these poor merchants. They are shriveled and frozen in postures of sheer pain, clutching their eyes. And it is a stunningly shocking sight. And the horror of what was done to them is very visceral and very potent when you see them all just locked there, husks of what they once were. A couple of them do still walk around, kind of zombie-like, just aimlessly stepping around their kin. And they'll attack anybody who disturbs the solace of their people. And they use Frenzied Flame attacks, because of course they summon the Frenzied Flame down onto them. One member of the tribe down there, still plays a tune on his instrument. It's a haunting melody. This kind of eulogy or something, just endlessly playing it for his people. Who knows how long he's just been sitting there, playing on his instrument. When they were all locked up with all of their instruments, they probably tried for a time to comfort themselves with music. And one by one, they lost all hope of rescue, of getting out of their fate, and then they called down the flame. There's a lot of horrible crimes that we see in Elden Ring, committed by America, committed by other people, committed by the Hornsent, for instance, in the new DLC. There's lots of terrible things that were done to people on the basis of their culture or their religion or just their bodies, being born with the wrong kind of body in Elden Ring. If you're an omen, for instance, consigns you to a horrible fate. And even with all of these terrible things, the fate of the merchants is the fate of the Great Caravan is one that always particularly disturbs me. Just the thought of all of them, shunted down into this dark chamber and just having to live there with each other as they slowly lost hope. Anyway, yeah, it's very dark, so you can see why I thought this would be an appropriate topic for Halloween. One fun side note is the tune that this merchant is playing. It actually returns later in the game, in the DLC. When you fight Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame, Midra, the Lord of Frenzied Flame, in his boss battle music, this little tune played by the merchant returns as kind of a, like a leitmotif, and plays for a minute, and it kind of becomes discordant and screams away, and it's just this amazing little musical touch that they incorporated there. It's a stroke of genius. Also, the line about them summoning the Flame of Frenzy, that is very important. Because later on, of course, when the tarnished that we play descends into the Frenzied Flame prescription, they can choose to inherit the Flame of Frenzy from the 3 fingers at the bottom of the chamber. And presumably, the 3 fingers were summoned there by the merchants, by their curse and their despair. So, the Golden Order, by punishing these merchants so horribly for their heresy, kind of planted the seeds that would eventually lead to the world, burning down, to a Lord of Frenzied Flame being crowned. Yeah, I think that's probably as much juice as we can extract from that item. Let's move on to another item, which has a slightly different explanation for why the Great Caravan was buried. Once you go into the sewers below Lanedale, you can find a spirit ash, the Nomad Ashes. And this Nomad Ash allows you to summon one of these members of the Great Caravan. And they're maddened and they're carrying their instrument, and they use Frenzied Flame attacks. And when you read the description of Nomad Ashes, this is what it says. Nomad Ashes, ashen remains in which spirits yet dwell, used to summon the spirit of a nomad, a member of a tribe that was entombed in the earth, so as to bury the maddening disease that followed them. Able to emit the terrible flame of frenzy from his eyes, but has low HP and is frail, unable to take much in the way of punishment. So, this is a different explanation, right? The nomadic merchant set said that the entire clan was buried alive far underground after being accused of heretical beliefs. But the Nomad Ashes says that they were entombed in the earth so as to bury the maddening disease that followed them. So, this might seem a little contradictory, but if we let's look a little bit more into what maddening disease means, right? And that might kind of clarify what's going on here. So, if you've played Elden Ring, you of course know that madness means one thing. It means the frenzied flame. And so the Nomad Ashes says that this maddening disease followed the Great Caravan. And we see some evidence that this is probably true, actually. A lot of evidence. Because the merchants throughout the world, throughout the game world that we find, who were not buried with the Great Caravan, they actually have a relationship to the Frenzied Flame as well. So, for example, if you attack them, they can use the Flame of Frenzy incantation, which I'll read to you just for fun. The Flame of Frenzy, incantation originating from the maddening 3 fingers, causes the yellow flame of frenzy to burst forth from the caster's eyes. Charging increases the range of the burst. The flame of frenzy deals damage and causes buildup of madness. This incantation also causes buildup of madness in the caster and is only effective against tarnished. So, these merchants are using this incantation, summoning the flame of frenzy in self-defense. So that clearly shows that they have a relationship to the frenzied flame that doesn't directly connect to being locked up in the Frenzied Flame proscription. There's also a note that we can acquire. It's called Note, the Lord of Frenzied Flame, and its description reads as follows. Note written by a nomadic merchant, succinctly detailing knowledge acquired. Quote, beneath Lanedell, at the very bottom, lies our Lord, Lord of the Frenzied, the Three Fingers, who holds us in thrall. End quote. So, it is worth noting that you don't actually acquire this letter from a merchant directly. You get it from a town kind of destroyed by frenzy. And so somebody might disagree that it kind of is from the perspective of a merchant, but that first line of the description does say, note written by a nomadic merchant. So I think it's quite likely that this note refers to something that a merchant wrote, right? A merchant said that at the very bottom of Lanedell lies our Lord, Lord of the Frenzied, the Three Fingers who hold us in thrall. So, this is another pretty compelling piece of evidence to me that the merchants had a connection to Frenzied Flame, because this merchant who wrote this presumably, was not one of the ones that was buried in the Frenzied Flame proscription. And so they still consider the Three Fingers their lord. They still consider themselves in the thrall of the Three Fingers. So this to me indicates that the merchant culture did have a connection to the Flame of Frenzy that predated their punishment by the Golden Order. The exact nature of this connection, I think, is totally up for debate. To me, look at that description again, right? It says, the Three Fingers who holds us in thrall. Thrall is not really a word you would use for, like a god that you're choosing to worship, or a king that you're willingly giving your loyalty to, right? Thrall has it means that you're under their control, right? You're kind of a slave. You're completely in the command of that thing. And it doesn't exactly have positive connotations. So that to me indicates maybe that there's this cultural connection to the Flame of Frenzy among the merchants. The source of it, who knows? Something in their history kind of led their people to having a fragment of the flame in them or something like that. But it doesn't necessarily, to me, seem like something that they're enthusiastic about. It doesn't seem like they worship the Flame of Frenzy, right? I mean, you meet a lot of characters in the game who are vassals of the Flame of Frenzy, you could say. Like Vike and Irina / Hayata. Shabriri, of course, we'll get to him later. And they all take a much more active role in kind of bringing about the dominance of Frenzy, or at least, killing people, attacking people, burning the world down around them. They're all serving Frenzy in some way. The merchants, they're just trading, right? They're not doing anything really that would advance the cause of Frenzy. They're just hanging around, running their little business. So that to me, again, is kind of an indication that they're not supporters of the Flame of Frenzy per se. It's more like this cultural burden that they bear, this cultural legacy or something, to be a member of this nomadic people is to have this kind of innate connection to frenzy for whatever reason. Yeah. And, that's just kind of reading the tea leaves a little bit, right? Somebody could disagree with that, I think, but I don't get the sense that they're really worshippers of frenzy. And if we go back to the quote from the Nomad Ashes, where it says, "The maddening disease that followed them," again, that kind of sounds like it's not something they're choosing for themselves, right? They're like haunted by this thing. They're haunted by this condition, by this frenzy. And it followed them like a disease, like a sickness. And we get a lot of references to the frenzied flame that refer to it in terms of disease, right? I gathered a few of them here. The item note, Frenzied Flame Village, says, "South of the grand lift of Dectus lies the Frenzied Flame Village, inhabited by the sick." And what are they sick with? Well, they're sick with frenzy. The Shabriri grape item says, "A yellowing, oozing eyeball of the infirm." Why are they infirm? Again, it's because they have the frenzy in them. The Shabriri's Woe Talisman, we'll read this in its entirety a little later, but just one line here says, "The blight of the flame of frenzy came to dwell in the empty sockets." Again, the blight, the blight. And the Howl of Shabriri incantation says, "The sickness of the flame of frenzy began with Shabriri." So, in these that we've just looked at, we've seen it referred to as the maddening disease. We've seen people who are frenzied referred to as sick or infirm. We've seen it called a blight and a sickness. So there's this idea that it kind of spreads, right? There's this disease element to it where if somebody's infected and they come into your town, it might spread. And the mechanics of the game kind of sell this as well a little bit, right? If you've watched a bunch of video game critique videos on YouTube, we might call this ludonarrative harmony, right? The mechanics and the lore are kind of synchronizing. Because the frenzied condition is, it spreads from those who have frenzy to those who do not have frenzy. You compare that to other conditions like the sleep condition, you don't need to have the sleep condition on you to infect somebody else with sleep. But with frenzy, all the enemies who spread frenzy to you are already frenzied. And when you use incantations that spread frenzy, the incantations give you frenzy as well. It's like it's like this virus that destroys the host as it spreads to others. Like a virus reproducing in a cell, and then the cell lysis occurs. It erupts out of the cell and kills it to spread to other cells nearby. Frenzy, does seem to be kind of this infectious thing. And so if we take that as kind of an idea, right? Frenzy is a disease. We can see how for the merchants, it would be kind of this this cultural burden, right? For whatever reason, they have this little bit of frenzy in them. They're able to kind of keep it contained, keep it controlled, because they're not wandering around like mad folk, tearing things to the ground. But you could imagine them wanting to, like, keep it secret, suppress it, and don't ever, ever, ever use it. Because if other people find out about it, it would be like, in real life, if you walked into a medieval town with the Black Plague or something, they'd kill you and burn your body, right? So if the flame of frenzy is like that in the world of Elden Ring, the merchants would want to keep it hidden. But in moments of desperation, they do seem to be willing to use it. So when you attack merchants, in the game, if you provoke them into fighting, they can use frenzied flame attacks. So, in their moment of desperation, when their life is on the line, they might tap into this sickness, this power that they have. Of course, when the Great Caravan was locked up, they summoned the Flame of Frenzy. So, they seem to avoid it when they can, but it seems they're willing to use it, in dire circumstances. Yeah, I just don't see any evidence of the merchants actively desiring to spread frenzied flame. But that's just, that's me. Yeah, so that's pretty much all the canon lore and information around the Great Caravan. Which obviously is not very much, right? But this video would be a little short if we stopped there, and there are some other interesting things to talk about. So I thought of two things to talk about. One is a quest line that was going to heavily involve the Great Caravan and merchant Kalé. And the second is a popular lore theory that I've seen online. I've heard it from my, I think I've mentioned, like, I've talk about this game's lore a lot with, like, my brothers and some friends who've played it, so I've seen them repeat it. I think some big YouTubers have put it in videos, because it really seems to have a lot of traction. But we're going to talk about these two things. We're going to talk about that cut quest line, and we're going to talk about this lore theory that I think has some pretty severe issues with it. Let's start with the lore theory. So, I said I would talk about Shabriri, and this is where I want to talk about Shabriri because the theory that I'm talking about goes something like this. There is there's Shabriri, who's this character associated with frenzy, and the theory says that Shabriri accused the Great Caravan of worshipping the frenzied flame, and then that caused them to be buried below the capital. And then at some point it's discovered that Shabriri lies, and he gets his eyes gouged out as a punishment. And then the frenzied flame, takes root in Shabriri's empty eye sockets. And then meanwhile, the merchants who were, supposedly innocent of association with the frenzied flame, become so distraught and full of despair in their imprisonment that they become what the Golden Order feared they were, right? They end up chanting a curse to summon the flame of frenzy because of the horrible, unfair crime that was done to them. So, I think that's a pretty fair representation of what the theory is, but I think it's pretty clearly incorrect, or at least has some really major flaws. I don't believe that Shabriri slandered the Great Caravan. I don't think that there's evidence for that. So, let's take this piece by piece. Let's talk about Shabriri. I'll bring you up to speed on the lore that you need to know about him. So, when you meet Shabriri in the game, he greets you like this. He says, "Finally, we meet. The tarnished who would be lord. Oh my, why the long face? I fear that you were previously acquainted with this vessel. Well, that is most unfortunate, for he is dead. As for his flesh, he gave it to me. Shabriri, I hope you can make your peace with that." And indeed, his body is that of Yura, a bloody finger hunter that you met earlier in your travels. And if you kill Shabriri, he says, "Shabriri is chaos incarnate. I cannot die. Ah, may chaos take the world." So, from this, we know that Shabriri is some kind of entity that is A, fundamentally connected to the Flame of Frenzy, and B, that he cannot die. He just kind of, he can inhabit vessels. And there's two items that we need to read now that kind of point to his origins. So, first is the talisman Shabriri's Woe. Disturbing likeness of a man whose eyes have been gouged out. The corners of his mouth are upturned in an almost flirtatious manner. Constantly attracts enemies' aggression. It is said that the man named Shabriri had his eyes gouged out as punishment for the crime of slander, and with time the blight of the Flame of Frenzy came to dwell in the empty sockets. And then we're going to read an incantation called Howl of Shabriri. Incantation originating from the maddening 3 fingers. Releases a maddening shriek that causes madness build up in foes nearby. This incantation also causes madness build up in the caster and makes enemies more likely to target them. It is said that the sickness of the Flame of Frenzy began with Shabriri, the most reviled man in all history. So, if we kind of combine these two item descriptions, we know that Shabriri was the first man to bear the sickness of the Flame of Frenzy. And we know that the blight of the Flame of Frenzy came to dwell in his eye sockets after his eyes were gouged out for the crime of slander. We also know that Shabriri is the most reviled man in all history, which is a very powerful statement, right? He must have really done something horrible. That he's warranted as the most reviled man in history. So, we can't say for certain what it was that made him the most reviled man. But to me, I think it's reasonable to think that if the sickness of the Flame of Frenzy began with Shabriri, as the Howl of Shabriri incantation says, then that is a crime worthy of being the most hated man in history. When you think of how horrible the Flame of Frenzy is. I mean, it's like, it is the worst thing you can possibly imagine if you're a resident of the lands between. It's just this disease that reduces your mind to madness and pain, and can, pop up anywhere and spread to other people like a disease and just destroy towns, and I mean, it's terrifying. I think that's a pretty good reason for him to be the most reviled man in all history. Let's just keep those facts in mind, right? That the sickness of the Flame of Frenzy originated with Shabriri. Okay. Now, let's revisit what we know about the Great Caravan. We remember from the Nomad Ashes that it says, a member of a tribe that was entombed in the earth so as to bury the maddening disease that followed them. And then from the Nomadic Merchants set, we get these merchants once thrived as the Great Caravan, but after being accused of heretical beliefs, their entire clan was rounded up and buried alive far underground. So, the two reasons we get for why they were buried is, one, to bury the maddening disease that followed them, and two, because they were accused of heretical beliefs. This theory postulates that the merchants, the Great Caravan, that they were falsely accused, that the crime of slander that got Shabriri's eyes gouged out was that he slandered the merchants as worshippers of the frenzied flame. But, I mean, first of all, the Nomadic Merchants set doesn't say anything about the accusation being true or false. It just says that they were accused of heretical beliefs. It doesn't say, they were falsely accused. It doesn't say they were discovered to have heretical beliefs. It just says they were accused of having heretical beliefs. And it leaves it, ambiguous about whether or not the accusation is true. Second, and more importantly, the Nomad Ashes say that there was a maddening disease that followed them. It says they were entombed to bury the maddening disease that followed them. And that suggests that the nomads did have a connection to the frenzied flame before they were entombed, which we discussed before at length, right? I think I talked about that if you attack the merchants, they use frenzied flame against you. I talked about the note that says, that refers to the three fingers as the merchant's lord. There's also a merchant, I didn't talk about this one, but there's a merchant in East Limgrave, and if you fight him and you kill him, he curses you as he dies, and he says, "Dirty little thief, melt away with the rest of it," which is, a clear reference to the frenzied flame, melting away all that divides and distinguishes. So, these merchants above ground, they weren't entombed with the Great Caravan, so they wouldn't have experienced the onset of madness that came to the Great Caravan if that punishment is indeed what brought the frenzied flame to them, right? But it seems very clear that the merchants had a connection to frenzied flame before. So, the idea that Shabriri could have slandered them is, first of all, just is wrong, right? I mean, it wouldn't be a slanderous accusation if they actually did have this connection to the flame of frenzy. Now we can talk about, like, were they actually worshippers of it? Did they have heretical beliefs? Or did they just have this disease that, wasn't their fault and they kind of fought against it and suppressed it? But the Golden Order would, of course wouldn't tolerate that, and then treated it as heretical beliefs and buried them anyways. So it totally makes sense to me that the caravan would be buried for their innate connection to the frenzied flame, because that's a very Golden Order thing to do. But it doesn't make sense that Shabriri would then be punished for slandering the merchants afterwards. Because if we assume, that somebody accused the merchants of these heretical beliefs, well, the accusation was, in the eyes of the Golden Order, was true enough. They have a connection to the frenzied flame that's unacceptable. We have to bury them away, right? So the idea that Shabriri would be punished afterwards doesn't make any sense. There's another problem, which is that we're told that the sickness of the flame of frenzy began with Shabriri, and that it took root in his empty eye sockets after his eyes were gouged out for the crime of slander. But we're also told that the merchants were followed by the maddening disease, right, which we can assume to be the flame of frenzy. So if Shabriri was the first man to have the sickness of the flame of frenzy, and it happened in the eyes of this theory, he inherited that flame of frenzy after slandering the merchants, then that directly contradicts the fact that the merchants were buried to suppress the maddening disease that followed them. If they were already infected with this disease, how could Shabriri be the first one to be infected? Right? The timeline doesn't check out. It doesn't make sense. The merchants have long had the frenzy in them. As I feel like we've proved pretty well, talking about the merchants above ground and all the connections they have, and then the nomad ashes that say they were buried to suppress that disease, it seems very clear the merchants had a cultural connection to the flame of frenzy. So, it just doesn't check out. If Shabriri had his eyes gouged out after accusing the merchants, he couldn't be the first man to have the flame of frenzy in him. So, I hope that's clear. But there's just a problem with the timeline there. But yeah, that I think that about covers it. I think, I don't really have an explanation directly besides, my alternative theory is just that Shabriri, a long time ago, committed a horrible slander that got his eyes gouged out, and then he became the first man to be infected with the flame of frenzy, and then the flame of frenzy spread, right? After Shabriri, the sickness of frenzy has been this kind of perpetual disease that the lands between have had to deal with forever, ever since him, making him the most reviled man in history. And then at some point in the intervening years, the Great Caravan comes along. They have this culture, and somehow they get this connection to frenzied flame. They pass through, the lands between or whatever, and they get accused of heretical beliefs because somebody finds out, oh, I heard the merchants have the frenzied flame in them, whatever. And they get punished and locked up, and then they summon the three fingers into the frenzied flame prescription. So that's my interpretation of the lore. I think people just saw accusation in the description about the Great Caravan, and they saw slander in the text about Shabriri, and they said, oh, this accusation and this slander, those must be the same. But I don't think the evidence really indicates that they are. It is possible to just have two different events that aren't connected, you know. And yeah. So I think that about covers that. I totally. I don't think my opinion on the matter is fact, of course. You know, all of this lore is heavily up for interpretation, but I will say I think the timeline issue is a strong enough problem with this theory that I just don't really see how you can get around that. You know, we learned from the item description pretty clearly that Shabriri was the first man to be infected with frenzied flame, but then this theory tells us that he gets punished after the merchants go in the pit and yada yada yada. I'm rambling. I've made my reasons clear. So let's move on to part 3 of this video, where I am going to talk about a cut questline, cut from the game. The information in this questline is extremely relevant to the Great Caravan, and if you know this questline, you were probably thinking about it as I was going through the lore earlier. But I decided to leave all of this stuff out because it's not truly canon, right? It was cut. It's a great quest. It's fully voice acted. I mean, it's phenomenal. And I know that some people kind of sort of think of it as canon in a way, but it isn't really, and so I didn't want to mix it up with the canon information from earlier. But from here on out, everything in this video is going to be non-canon, right? It's all the dialogue and whatever does not appear in the game. So just be aware of that. And then lastly, there are obviously we only have this cut content information because of people who have delved into the game files and whatnot and pulled it all out. So my information for this segment comes in particular from a YouTube channel called Sekiro Tubby, who reconstructed this questline very impressively, kind of going through it step by step as best, kind of filling in the gaps as they needed to. And it's a really, really great video. So I will link that video in the description, and if you want to see this whole quest line for yourself, I highly recommend that you check it out. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this cut quest line about the Great Caravan. So this begins with Merchant Kalé in the Church of Elden. He sells you his stuff, and he says, and this is actually in the base game as well. This quote, he says, "Perhaps you don't need to hear this, but see that no harm comes to my kin. We have a saying, we wanderers, lament not your solitude, expect no sympathy, no regard, nothing. But if anyone dares harm us, show them no mercy." That is our code, so to speak, just the way we are, deeply unforgiving. And now this is where the cut content begins. By the way, have you heard of the Great Caravan? And you say no. And he says, I see. More's the pity. Well, even we had a place to call home once. The Great Caravan, they called it. But it's been lost to us for ages. I've been been searching for it as long as I can remember, and with a name like that, you'd hope they kept some fine goods there, eh? And then, after you've beat Godric the Grafted, the Rune-Bearer in Stormvale Castle, and you return to Kalé, he says, I suppose I shouldn't keep this from you. I'm thinking of moving elsewhere for a time. My people are wanderers all, which I won't deny is one reason, but I've done all I can here in search of the Great Caravan. Kalé then leaves, and he leaves behind a little message pointing you to his next destination. And later on you can find Kalé in Liurnia of the Lakes and continue your talk with him, and he says, have you seen a crow around here by any chance? You know, a burial crow, with a letter fastened to its claw. Well, if you do set eyes upon it, I'll buy that letter from you, no question. I'll give you a generous sum for it, of course. And so you wander off and you find this burial crow, and you acquire an item called Burial Crow's Letter, and the description reads, a letter affixed to a graveyard crow's leg, sought after by Kalé. You sell the letter back to Kalé, and he replies, my thanks. I've been wanting to get my hands on this. So, about the letter you brought me, it's just as I suspected. It features a cryptogram of my people. I'm sure it's come from wherever the Great Caravan disappeared to. This could be my chance to get close to it. Thanks to you. I've always preferred my company to that of others' peoples, and I don't have any burning questions I wish to ask my ancestors, but there's something I want to know. My roots. I want to know who I am, where I came from, where I'm headed. Kalé then moves on and leaves another message, pointing you to Lane Dell. And when you meet him there, he says, good to see you. I knew leaving the sign would be worth the trouble. The shop is all set up. A pleasure as ever. Care to purchase anything? Asking him about the letter prompts him to say, oh, yes, about the cryptogram from the letter. I think it's pointing here, underneath the capital, but I'm perplexed as to the path to take down there. Well, the journey can wait, I suppose. I'll settle here for the time being and start looking into it. You can then find another burial crow and deliver the letter on it to Kalé. This time the letter's description is, a letter written about the caravans. It seems to have been sent from the capital underground. Kalé responds by saying, where did you find this letter? I can't imagine how it ended up here. But the well might just lead under the capital, to the spot indicated by the cryptogram from the letter. Seems like an odd place for the Great Caravan, but no amount of thinking will change anything. I'll be heading straight there, after some preparation. Once again, I find myself in your debt. Take this as a token of my appreciation. It's not from my usual stock, but something rather more special. I hope you can join me at the Great Caravan, in fact. Who knows what wonders there might be to trade. Kalé leaves another message behind, and he descends under the capital. We follow him to the subterranean shunning grounds and all the way down to the Frenzied Flame prescription. And he speaks to us again and says, You, is it? Did you see what they did to my ancestors? The whole clan buried alive, sick, maddened, husks of themselves. Have you heard their moans? They're hardly human anymore. They think we worship the three fingers, that we called the maddening sickness down upon them. Well, if that's what they expect from us, then that's what they shall get from us. The world of grace and its people should have been content to see us sink between the cracks, but to have intruded upon our solace, having broken us upon their whims, I'll never forgive any of you. I'm sorry, but we won't be trading any longer, and I think it's time we parted ways. Guided by grace, you seek to become Elden Lord. I don't want anything to do with you tarnished lot anymore. I should apologize to you. It's my fault that we stumbled into this mess. I'm sorry. You can then acquire the Flame of Frenzy by being embraced by the three fingers. And when you speak to Kalé after doing so, he says, "Wait, what's that? You've inherited the Flame of Frenzy. Ah, that's it. That's what I need. To melt away the curses, suffering, and despair, and the order entire. The yellow flame of chaos. Oh, three fingers. Throw wide the door. Please, bestow unto me the yellow flame of chaos, a frenzied flame to melt away the curses, suffering, and despair, and the order entire. May chaos take the world. May chaos take the world." Kalé then reaches the three fingers, and you can speak to him after. And he says, "The frenzied flame burned me. I was not a suitable home. Unknown warrior, you who reached the three fingers abyss. Tell the one who will become Lord, divest yourself of everything. Head to the door. Divest yourself of everything. Pray to the Lord to melt away the curses, suffering, and despair, and the order entire. May chaos take the world." And there you have it. That is the end of the cut quest line involving Kalé and the Great Caravan. It's obviously a very exciting quest. I really like it. The emotional journey of Kalé discovering his ancestors is very compelling. Yeah, I just really like it. I don't know why they decided to cut it. I'm sure they had their reasons. But, I mean, obviously there is another NPC, the Hayata quest line, that is in the game. They would both kind of end up in the Frenzied Flame prescription at the end. So, maybe in a sense it's a little bit redundant. But either way, yeah, the information presented in that quest line seems to contradict a little bit some of the stuff we've been talking about from the canonical game. So I don't know if that's part of it or not, but for instance, Kalé, he says that thing about if that's what they expect from us, then that's what they shall get from us. They think we worship the three fingers, that we called the maddening sickness down upon them. As if that were incorrect. But in the context of the game, it is correct. So those lines seem a little out of place. And perhaps reflect a slightly altered version of the lore. I don't know. But yeah, I'll leave you to reflect on that quest line yourself. I mean, obviously it's non-canon, and I do think it causes some friction with parts of the game, but it's also it's a great quest, so I'll leave you to reflect on that. And happy Halloween. Well, not Halloween yet, a couple more weeks, but happy October. Thank you for joining me for this little spooky, disturbing, tragic tale of the Great Caravan. It's one of my favorite parts of Elden Ring. It's so incredibly memorable to me, descending below the capital and just getting lost in the sewers and then finding this big elevator, and you're just going deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you fight Moog, and there's a hidden path behind him. And then it's like you're descending into hell. You just go into this next room, and there's just all these bodies, and it's so horrifying. So, the Great Caravan doesn't have a ton of stuff in the game about it, but I really enjoy it. And I hope that you enjoyed learning about it with me. So, thank you for stopping by, my friend. I will see you next time. Goodbye.